This is my true story. I was a father who gave everything to his only son: food, shelter, education, and every chance at a good life. I worked, I sacrificed, and I believed that when my time came, he would stand by me. But I was wrong. The same boy I raised turned into a man I could no longer recognize. One day, he looked me in the eyes and said the words that broke me forever. "Get out of my life." He left me on the street with $1. But what I did next brought him to his knees. Before I tell you what happened, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. And please subscribe so my story can reach more people. I gave that boy everything a father could give. From the day he was born, every part of my life revolved around him. I worked double shifts, stayed late at the factory, and came home covered in grease just so he could have what I never did. When he was little, I fed him first and ate whatever was left. When he was older, I paid for his school, his sports, his clothes, even the car he drove to college. Every dream he chased had my hands behind it. I fixed his roof when it leaked, repaired his engine when it broke, and covered his rent when he said money was tight. Every time he asked for help, I said yes. Not because I had much, but because that's what fathers do. I remember working in the rain, sick and tired, just to pay his tuition. I remember pawning my wedding ring to cover a hospital bill he couldn't afford. I remember holding my chest in pain one night after working too long, but I didn't stop. I told myself it would all be worth it once he was stable, once he finally made it in life. And for a while, I thought he did. He had a house, a wife, and a business. He looked like the kind of man I'd spent my life trying to raise. I was proud. I thought my work was done. I thought I could rest, knowing my son had everything I built for him. But the truth came out slowly. First, he stopped calling as often. Then the visits became shorter. Then, when he did call, it wasn't to ask how I was. It was to ask for more. More money, more favors, more signatures on papers I didn't understand. I told myself it was normal, that he was just busy, that sons grow up and drift away. I didn't want to believe that the same boy who once clung to my leg as a child could look at me one day and see nothing but a burden. When my health started to fail, I asked him for help getting to my doctor appointments. He said he was too busy. I asked if I could stay with him for a few weeks while I recovered. He said the house was too full. I began to realize that every sacrifice I made was forgotten the moment I stopped being useful. Still, I couldn't stop loving him. I couldn't turn off the instinct that told me to protect him no matter what. That's the cruel part about being a parent. Love doesn't fade just because respect does. I had built him a life so strong that he never had to struggle, and that was my biggest mistake. I thought kindness built gratitude, but it built entitlement. Every dollar I gave made him forget where it came from. Every favor I did erased the lesson he was supposed to learn. And when I finally needed him, he saw me not as a father, but as weight, something to cut loose. The house he lived in was built on my sweat. The land it stood on was bought with my money. The same roof that kept him warm was the one I had saved under for decades. But none of that mattered anymore. He had changed. Or maybe he'd been this way all along, and I was just too blind to see it. I thought a father's job was to give until he had nothing left. But the day came when I learned that giving everything doesn't earn love. It only teaches people to take. It happened on a hot afternoon, the kind where the air feels heavy and quiet. I went to his house like I always did, hoping we could talk. I had just one small bag with me, a few clothes, my medicine, and an envelope with some old photos. I thought maybe if he saw those pictures again, he'd remember what kind of father I'd been. When I knocked on the door, he opened it with a look I'll never forget. Not surprise, not worry, just annoyance. He looked at me like I was a problem he wanted to get rid of. I told him I had nowhere else to go, that I needed a few days until my health got better. He didn't say much. He just sighed, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a single dollar. Then he said the words that ended everything. "Get out of my life." He tossed the dollar toward me, and it hit the ground between us. I stood there frozen, watching him walk back into the house without a second glance. The door slammed. The lock clicked. That sound was louder than any shout could ever be. The neighbors saw. They watched from their porches as I bent down, picked up that dollar, and put it in my pocket. Some looked shocked, others just turned away. Nobody said a word. I felt their eyes follow me as I started walking down the street. My legs were weak, but my heart was weaker. That one moment erased everything, every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every ounce of love I had poured into that boy's life. The heat burned through my clothes as I walked. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't even care. The same streets I once drove him down as a kid now felt endless. I thought about all the times I held his hand crossing those same roads, how proud I felt the first time he called me Dad. Now I was walking alone, just another old man nobody cared about. By evening, my feet were blistered, my throat dry. I sat on a bench outside a gas station. I pulled that dollar from my pocket and stared at it. It wasn't money anymore. It was a message. A message that I meant nothing to him. $1 for a lifetime of devotion. I could have thrown it away, but I didn't. I kept it. It reminded me that I had nothing left to lose, and that gave me strength I didn't know I still had. As the sun went down, I watched cars drive by, families laughing inside. I used to be part of that world. Sunday dinners, holidays, phone calls. Now I was invisible. The man who once worked 3 jobs to build a home was sitting on a bench with nothing but a single dollar to his name. When darkness came, I found an alley to sleep in. The concrete was cold, the noise was constant, and every sound made me flinch. I thought about going back, begging him to let me in, but I stopped myself. Begging was something I had never done in my life, and I wasn't going to start now. If he wanted me gone, I'd go, but he'd regret it. I didn't know how or when, but I knew the day would come when he'd wish he'd never thrown me away like that. That dollar in my pocket wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of his downfall. The first night on the street felt longer than any year I'd ever lived. The ground was hard, the air heavy with smoke, and my body refused to rest. I sat under a flickering streetlight, watching the shadows move, and tried to convince myself this was only temporary. But by morning, I realized this was my new life. I had nowhere to go. The benches became my bed, and the sound of cars replaced the comfort of a ticking clock from home. Every breath felt heavier, and every minute without a roof felt like punishment for trusting the wrong person, my own son. I searched trash bins behind grocery stores for leftovers. Sometimes I'd find a half-eaten sandwich, sometimes just a cup with melted ice. The first few days, I still felt shame. I'd wait until no one was watching before I picked something up. But shame fades when hunger grows. Soon, I stopped caring who saw me. My hands trembled from exhaustion, but my mind stayed clear. I wasn't losing myself. I was watching the world for what it really was. People stepped over me like I was part of the sidewalk. Their eyes moved past me fast, pretending not to see. That's when I understood what my son had become. One of them, cold, proud, empty. I walked the streets during the day to stay warm. The police didn't bother me much, but some shop owners yelled if I sat near their doors. I learned which corners were safe, which shelters had food, and which nights I'd have to fight the cold alone. I found one old blanket in a dumpster and used it like armor. It smelled like oil and dust, but it kept me alive. Every night I thought of my son's face, the way he looked at me with disgust, the way his wife smiled behind him like they had won something. They thought I'd die out there. Maybe they even hoped I would. But I didn't. Every day I survived was a day their plan failed. I told myself that one day they'd pay attention again, not because they cared, but because they'd lose what mattered most to them: control. Weeks passed. My beard grew, my clothes tore, but I kept that single dollar in my pocket. It was wrinkled and dirty, but I wouldn't let it go. That dollar became my reminder. Of pain, yes, but also of purpose. I started picking up cans and bottles, trading them for coins at recycling centers. It wasn't much, but it gave me something to hold on to besides anger. I learned to move quietly, to keep my head down, to survive without being noticed. Some nights it rained so hard my blanket turned to mud. I sat under bus stops, watching headlights pass, wondering if one of those cars was his. Sometimes, when I was too weak to stand, I thought maybe he'd done me a favor. Maybe being thrown away was what I needed to see who I truly was. Not a helpless old man, but a survivor who still had one thing left: the truth. Because deep down, I remembered something he didn't: the papers, the titles, the documents he never cared to understand. I had spent years running my small business, investing, saving. And while he thought he had taken everything from me, he never knew how much I still owned. I might have been living on the street, but on paper, I still held power. I didn't use it yet. I wasn't ready. But every long night under the cold sky built one thing stronger than any wall: patience. He thought he had ended me, but what he really did was give me time. Time to plan, time to remember, and time to prepare for the day he'd finally learn who I really was. Even after everything he did, I still loved him. That's the hardest part to explain. Love doesn't vanish when someone betrays you. It just turns into something heavier. I sat on that same bench every night, thinking about the boy I used to carry on my shoulders, the one who'd fall asleep in my arms after watching cartoons. I thought about the nights he had nightmares, and I'd stay awake till morning to keep him calm. Those memories didn't die just because he told me to leave. They stayed, burned into me like old scars that never fade. That love hurt more than hunger. Hunger fades when you find scraps to eat, but love doesn't fade when it's betrayed. It keeps cutting, slowly. I would close my eyes and see his little face, that same boy who once said he'd take care of me when I'm old. Those words used to make me proud. Now they made me sick. Because when the time came, he didn't take care of me. He threw me out like trash. And still, part of me wanted to forgive him. I wanted him to come back, to say he was sorry, to remember who I was. But days passed, then weeks, and nothing came. Sometimes I'd pass by his neighborhood when I collected cans. I'd walk by the street where his house stood. The windows glowed at night, laughter echoing from inside. I'd stand far enough that no one saw me, watching them eat, laugh, and live while I stood there freezing. That's when I realized something dark. He wasn't just ignoring me. He was proud of what he'd done. He thought getting rid of me made him strong. He wanted to look successful, powerful, untouchable. And in his mind, an old father like me didn't fit that picture. He told people I was broke, that I had wasted all my savings, that I was a burden who didn't plan for retirement. He said I had nothing left. That's what he told his friends. But I knew the truth. He didn't even know what I still owned. He never asked how the bills got paid when he was a child. He never cared who signed the loan that bought him his first car. He didn't know whose name still sat quietly at the bottom of the property deeds. He thought my silence meant weakness, but silence was my strength. Every rumor he spread only pushed people further away from me. Old friends stopped calling. Neighbors crossed the road when they saw me coming. I heard one man whisper, "That's the guy whose own son threw him out." The shame wasn't theirs. It was mine. Not because of what I'd lost, but because I raised a man like that. I kept asking myself where I went wrong. Maybe I gave him too much. Maybe I made his life too easy. Maybe I never taught him what pain feels like. Because pain teaches you gratitude, and he had none. But even as I sat alone, covered in dirt and hunger, I couldn't fully hate him. Every father wants to believe their child will come around one day. I told myself he'd see me again. Maybe not as a beggar, but as a man. I didn't want revenge then. I wanted justice. I wanted him to understand what he'd done. That $1 he threw wasn't just an insult. It was his mirror. It showed exactly what kind of man he'd become. I started to realize that I didn't have to hurt him with anger. I could hurt him with truth. I could make him face the weight of his own greed. That night, as I lay under the bridge, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't die on these streets. I would rise again, not for me, but so he could see the face of the man he threw away, standing taller than he ever would. When people didn't see me anymore, he started shaping the story his way. He told everyone I had lost my mind. He said I spent my savings on gambling, that I ruined everything myself, that he had no choice but to let me go. The neighbors believed him because it was easier to blame the old man than question the son who wore new suits and drove new cars. That's how lies work. They sound cleaner than truth. He told relatives that I was sick, that I refused help, that I wanted to live on the street. None of them called to check. They believed every word. He made sure I looked like a burden even in absence. Every time someone asked where I was, he would shrug and say, "He's doing his thing." He turned me into a ghost, a name without a face, a story no one wanted to dig into. His wife played along too. She smiled for pictures, posted online about their new beginning, and wrote how they had cut off negativity. That negativity was me. The man who paid for their wedding, their house, their car, and even their honeymoon. I had become a stain they wanted erased. But the thing about lies is that they don't erase truth. They just bury it under time. And time is something I had plenty of. While they were busy showing off, I was remembering every detail, every account, every document. I may have been on the street, but I wasn't senile. My memory was sharp, and I knew exactly where the power still was. Years ago, when I retired, I had set up my finances carefully. The properties, the savings, even the shares in the company I built. They were in my name. Some of it was under trust, some under corporate titles. My son thought he'd inherited everything already. He never checked. He lied to banks too, told them I had passed away so he could take over some accounts. But when he found out the signatures didn't match, the process froze. He blamed paperwork delays. I smiled when I overheard through an old friend that he'd been rejected for a business loan because the property titles didn't verify under his name. That was the first small crack. It wasn't revenge yet. It was reality catching up. I found out later that he had been living off those lies. He told investors he had inherited assets that weren't his. He borrowed against property he didn't own. He built his fake success on my name. All the while, he called me crazy, lazy, useless. He tried to make sure no one would believe me even if I ever came back. But I didn't need people to believe me. I just needed time. Sometimes at night, I'd think about calling him out in public, showing up in front of his friends, telling the truth. But then I'd stop myself. Let him dig his own hole. Let the lies pile up. Because when lies grow tall, they fall harder. I knew one day the truth would crush him without me lifting a finger. I kept every scrap of proof I needed. Photocopies of titles, old ledgers, even voice recordings. Everything was safe in a deposit box he didn't know existed. The same lawyer who handled my estate years ago still checked on me quietly. I told him not to rush. I told him to wait until I said the word. The world thought I was gone, but I was just waiting for the right moment to remind them who really built everything they were standing on. He wanted people to think I was weak. I let him. Because when you play weak, your enemies stop watching, and when they stop watching, that's when you strike. The secret was simple. Everything they thought they owned was still mine. Years ago, when I set up my finances, I didn't trust the world, not even my own blood. I had built safety nets inside contracts, backup signatures, and silent ownership paths that couldn't be broken without my consent. My son didn't know any of it. He thought the papers he signed years ago had handed him full control. But those were only temporary authorizations, all of which expired the year he threw me out. On paper, the house, the business, the land, all of it still belonged to me. He never checked. He never cared enough to look deeper than his ego. The company he bragged about running was funded through my retirement trust. Every paycheck he gave himself came from an account I opened. He thought he was the boss, but legally he was my employee. When he kicked me out, he didn't just lose his father. He lost his foundation. He was sitting on land he didn't own, driving cars leased in my name, and building deals using my credit. And the best part, the lawyer who handled every one of those documents was still loyal to me, quietly, faithfully, waiting for my word. While I sat on those cold streets, I kept thinking about how blind he'd become. He thought his success made him powerful, but power built on someone else's name isn't power, it's dependency. Every lie he told only tightened the rope around his own neck. I had spent decades building my life smartly, quietly. Not for revenge, but for protection. I didn't trust easy, and now that habit was saving me. When I finally met my lawyer again, he was shocked to see me alive. I told him I wanted everything moved, not sold, not donated, just secured away from the people who betrayed me. He nodded and got to work. It took only a few signatures to rewrite the story of ownership. The company shares were reactivated in my control. The property taxes switched back to my name. Every joint account he had access to froze. I didn't have to lift a finger against him. The law did it for me. He was too busy showing off his wealth to notice the storm coming. Within days, the bank sent notices. His cards stopped working. His payroll system glitched. The house mortgage bounced. And when he called to fix it, they told him he needed my authorization. My name. The name he had erased from his life now controlled everything he touched. But the secret wasn't just about money. It was about foresight. I'd always believed that love should be given freely, but respect should be earned. He failed to earn it. And when you take love for granted, all that's left to teach is consequence. I wasn't angry anymore. I was calm. I had no need to yell or prove a point. The documents would do that on their own. I still remember the day I walked into the courthouse with my lawyer. We filed one last motion that finalized everything. My signature restored all rights to my estate and blocked every unauthorized transaction he'd made for the past 2 years. I didn't even need to face him. I just walked out into the sunlight, knowing the truth was finally where it belonged, on paper, under my control. That night, I slept in a clean bed for the first time in months. Not because I was rich again, but because I had peace. The kind of peace that only comes when you take back what was stolen. Not with anger, but with precision. Nah. He thought he destroyed me when he threw me out with $1. What he didn't know was that dollar was the last thing he'd ever owned that had real value. After months of silence, I decided it was time to stand again. Not with pride, but with purpose. I started walking every day, slowly at first, using an old cane I found behind a church shelter. My legs hurt, but I kept moving. Each step reminded me that I was still alive, that he hadn't buried me like he wanted to. The world looked different now. The same streets I once drove down in my truck now looked wider, emptier. I passed stores that used to greet me by name. Some still recognized me, some pretended not to. It didn't matter anymore. I wasn't walking for pity. I was walking to take back control. One afternoon, I walked into the law office again. My lawyer, a quiet man who had helped me with my company decades ago, greeted me like an old friend. He didn't ask questions. He just pulled out a file thicker than a phone book, my life, on paper. We went through everything line by line. It wasn't hard. I still remembered every account, every title, every property I had built with my hands. It was all still mine. He told me we could start transferring everything under a new trust, one my son would never access. I nodded and said, "Do it." For the first time in years, I wasn't a burden or a victim. I was in charge again. We set up meetings, phone calls, and signings. I didn't have much. No house, no car, just my ID and my willpower. But I still had my mind, and that was enough. The process took weeks. Every signature I placed on paper felt like another piece of my dignity coming back. I didn't tell anyone where I was or what I was doing. My son thought I was gone, forgotten, buried under his lies. That was my advantage. He was loud and careless. I was quiet and deliberate. While he bragged about money that wasn't his, I was building a wall around everything that actually mattered. One document at a time, one account at a time, I locked him out. He'd wake up soon and realize that the empire he claimed to own was just a shadow, and the real foundation belonged to the man he threw out. Walking back from those meetings, I'd pass by the diner I used to take him to as a kid. I'd remember how he'd order the biggest burger and laugh with his mouth full. Those memories used to hurt. Now they just reminded me how far I'd come. Pain stops feeling heavy when you start turning it into work. And I was working, not to destroy him, but to make him see, to make him learn what it feels like to stand alone. The nursing home offered me a bed, But I refused. I told them I'd figure it out. I stayed a few nights in a small motel near the highway. Cheap room, broken heater, but quiet. Each night, I'd sit by the window and think about the years I spent fixing everything for him. His car, his roof, his life. Now I was fixing myself. When the lawyer called and said, "It's done," I didn't celebrate. I just stared out the window, feeling a kind of silence I hadn't felt in decades. Peace doesn't come with noise, it comes with closure. I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't need revenge. I just wanted him to know that the man he called worthless had outsmarted him with nothing but patience and a pen. The next morning, I took my first real walk without the cane. The air was cold, the sky gray, but I felt stronger. Every step I took away from the past brought me closer to who I used to be. Not the weak old man he left behind, but the father who built everything with sweat and willpower. And this time, I was walking towards something no one could take. My freedom. It happened on a Thursday morning. The same kind of day he used to wake up proud, thinking he owned the world. He was standing in front of his company's building, talking to his staff, when the men in black suits arrived. They didn't yell. They didn't threaten. They simply handed him a stack of papers and said his access was revoked. Every account, every property, every loan, all frozen. His company cards stopped working. The cars in his name were repossessed before noon. The house mortgage, the one he used to brag about paying off early, was seized under my ownership. He didn't know it yet, but everything had come full circle. When he tried calling the bank, they told him the accounts were under review. When he tried logging in, every password was locked. He called the lawyer who once handled our family matters, but the man wouldn't take his call. He ran from office to office, shouting at people, asking what was going on. The same investors who once praised him stopped answering his messages. The same friends who used to laugh with him over drinks now acted like they didn't know him. I didn't need to see it to imagine his panic, the confusion, the fear, the sudden silence around him when he realized that the empire he built on arrogance had no ground beneath it. By midday, he drove to the company parking lot, only to find his reserved spot gone and his nameplate removed from the office door. The board had already received the updated documents. Ownership returned to me. My lawyer sent him a copy just to make sure he understood. He was out. He had nothing. The man who once told me to get out of his life now had no life left to run. Later that day, he rushed to the house he used to call his own. The gate was locked. The keys didn't work. There was a new lock, a new code, and a new owner. Me. I was sitting inside, not out of pride, but to close a chapter. I didn't speak when he arrived. I didn't need to. The papers spoke louder than words ever could. He pounded on the door, shouting and begging for someone to explain, but all he heard was silence. The same silence I once heard when I knocked on his door with a single dollar in my pocket. By the evening, the neighbors had come outside. They saw him shouting in the yard, his voice cracking, his hands shaking. The man who once looked down on everyone was now on his knees, pleading for help. People whispered, phones recorded, and faces turned away. He had mocked me for being weak, but now he looked smaller than I ever did. His pride broke before his wealth did. He tried calling his wife, but she was already packing her bags. She didn't marry him for love. She married him for the money that wasn't his to begin with. When the last car left the driveway, I stepped outside. He looked up at me, eyes hollow, realizing I had taken back everything he took for granted. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need revenge or forgiveness. I just told him the truth, that he had built his entire life on my work, my name, and my silence. And now, all three belonged back where they started, with me. That night, he slept in his car. I didn't watch him go. I closed the door, turned off the lights, and sat in my chair quietly. The house felt heavy, but peaceful. For the first time in years, I wasn't angry. I wasn't broken. I was free. He had lost everything he thought made him powerful. But what he really lost was his father, the one man who would have helped him through anything if he had just chosen respect instead of pride. His fall didn't come all at once. It came in slow, painful pieces, the same way he had broken me. The first thing he lost was his house. The bank called in the loan after realizing the ownership had shifted. Within days, notices appeared on the front door. He tried to argue, but he had no legal claim. Every signature, every title, every paper pointed back to me. The same home he had mocked me in was now being emptied by movers. Neighbors watched from their driveways as the man who once bragged about being self-made stood helpless while strangers carried out furniture he didn't even pay for. Next went the business. Investors withdrew, citing instability. His employees stopped showing up. Some took better offers from competing firms. Others simply didn't want to be tied to a man whose name was suddenly surrounded by scandal. His office desk was cleared out. His company laptop was seized. He begged the bank to let him transfer funds, but every account was locked under court order until my trust review completed. The more he fought, the deeper he sank. By the second week, the man who once controlled a company couldn't even control his own credit card. Then came the friends, the ones who used to drink with him, call him sir, laugh at his jokes. They vanished. Nobody answers calls from a man who's lost his power. They started whispering instead, saying he must have stolen from me, that he'd cheated his own father, that karma had caught up. He couldn't escape the rumors because they were true. The world he built on lies was collapsing exactly the way he built it, from the inside. He tried to come to me, thinking I'd feel pity. I didn't. I had already spent too many nights wishing he'd just be decent, too many years hoping he'd see me as more than a wallet. The moment he threw that dollar at me, he buried any chance of compassion. Now, I only gave him what he gave me. Silence. He showed up outside my gate twice, both times looking thinner, wearing clothes that no longer fit. He looked like a stranger. Once, he waited outside in the rain for hours. I watched from inside. He didn't see me. I didn't move. Eventually, he left. When I finally saw him again, months later, he was working at a small warehouse on the edge of town, one of the few places that would hire someone with a reputation as a fraud. He unloaded trucks. The same hands that used to sign checks now carried boxes. I didn't feel joy seeing him there, only closure. This was the man I raised, the man who once said he didn't need me. Now, every dollar he earned came from sweat, not arrogance. I wanted him to learn what work really feels like. He lived in a cheap apartment after that, one room, no heat. The kind of place you end up in when the world forgets your name. His wife left. She took what little she could sell, jewelry, clothes, memories, and disappeared. He called me once, using a borrowed phone. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. He had said, "Get out of my life," and I had listened. Word spread around town. People stopped mentioning him. Some pitied me, thinking I'd be broken by what happened. But they didn't know. I wasn't broken. I was finally free from the guilt of raising a man who forgot his roots. Every time I passed the warehouse, I saw him carrying boxes and looking over his shoulder, like a man haunted by his own mistakes. He wasn't just working, he was paying a debt. Not to me, but to the truth. Sometimes I wonder if he ever looks back and realizes the day he kicked me out was the day he kicked out his future. Because everything he lost wasn't punishment. It was just the balance of life catching up. What you give is what comes back. He gave cruelty. He received emptiness. When the dust finally settled, I knew it was time for the last move. Not for revenge, but for closure. I didn't want him destroyed. I wanted him to understand. I had spent my whole life fixing his problems, paying his debts, and cleaning up his messes. This time, I wanted him to fix his own. But I also wanted to make sure he would never forget the lesson that took everything from him to learn. So, I made one final decision that would seal both of our fates, him in humility, me in peace. I met with my lawyer one last time in that small office downtown. We went through every account, every title, every remaining property. I told him to keep my company running, but under one condition: hire my son, not as an owner, not as a partner, as an employee, minimum pay, no special treatment. My lawyer raised his eyebrows but said nothing. He knew this wasn't anger, it was justice. I wanted my son to earn what he once threw away. To wake up every morning and walk through the same doors he once owned, not as a boss, but as a worker. The next morning, the offer letter went out. I made sure it had my signature on it. He didn't know it came from me at first. He was desperate. No one else would hire him. His name was ruined, his savings gone, his pride buried. When he showed up for the interview, the manager handed him the paper with my name on top. The moment he saw it, I was told he froze. He knew exactly what it meant. The man he threw out now signed his paychecks. When the report came back that he accepted the job, I didn't celebrate. I just sat in my chair, quiet, looking out the window. I thought about how life works, how one small act of cruelty can circle back years later, sharper than the moment it started. I didn't need to see him. I didn't need to speak. The lesson was already being taught by the weight of his new life. He would show up every morning, clock in, take orders from people he once commanded. Every paycheck he earned would carry my name. Every hour he worked would remind him of that dollar he threw at me. I heard he started keeping to himself. No more bragging, no more pretending, just quiet, steady work. Sometimes, that's what true punishment looks like. Not suffering, but humility. I didn't want to ruin him. I wanted to rebuild him. The world had already taken care of the first part. I was helping with the second. As for me, I moved to a smaller place, peaceful, clean, enough for one man. I didn't need much anymore. I cooked my meals, watched the sun rise, and slept without worry. The same hands that once begged for food now signed contracts worth millions. But I didn't care about the money. I cared about what it stood for. Freedom earned, respect regained. Some nights, I'd hear that he was doing better. Slowly, humbly, learning what life means when everything fake is stripped away. I never called him. I never visited. But I knew he thought of me every day. Not out of guilt, but out of understanding. He had finally become the man I raised him to be, the hard way. Now I sit in peace, no anger, no hate, just a quiet truth, that life always pays you back for what you give. He threw me on the street with $1, and I gave him back the world he thought he could handle. But this time, he had to earn it. Final thought. He told me to get out of his life, so I did. I walked away, built it all again, and came back as his boss. He learned that respect is not given by age or blood. It's earned by how you treat those who raised you.